My name is Laurel Mackenzie, and I am 32 years old. I was 8 when my mother loaded 2 duffel bags into the back of her boyfriend's hatchback, drove me 3 hours north on the Trans-Canada to my grandmother's farmhouse outside Pictou, Nova Scotia, told me she needed a little while to figure things out, and never figured anything out. Not for me, at least. Not once in 24 years. My grandmother, Gran, I always called her Gran, was 61 years old and recently widowed when she became, without asking and without complaint, the only parent I had. She was a small woman with flour-dusted hands and an unhurried way of moving through the world, the kind of quiet that only comes from a lifetime of knowing exactly who you are. She raised me in that white clapboard farmhouse on 12 acres of Nova Scotia countryside, the same way she raised everything else she cared about. Steadily, without ceremony, without ever making me feel like I was something she had inherited instead of chosen. She taught me how to read a seed catalog, how to put up preserves before the first frost, how to balance a checkbook and negotiate with the hardware store in town, and change a car battery in the driveway without asking anyone for help. She taught me to drive on the back roads when I was 15, sitting in the passenger seat with one hand braced on the dashboard, and her eyes perfectly calm, even when I took the curve past the old Semple farm too fast. She taught me, without ever using the words, how to be someone worth being. My half-brother grew up with my mother. My stepbrother, her partner's son from his first marriage, was folded into that household too. Eventually, the way these things happen when someone moves on quickly and needs a ready-made family to replace the one she left behind. They got the apartment in Midtown Toronto, the Christmases with presents under a real tree, the summers renting a cottage somewhere on Georgian Bay. They got the version of her I didn't, and I spent a long time being sorry about that before I understood there wasn't much to be sorry for. Gran was diagnosed with a progressive lung condition 2.5 years ago, the kind with a long Latin name and a frustrating vagueness about timeline. It was not cancer. It was something slower, something that arrived not with drama but with a gradual narrowing. The stairs getting harder, the coughing at night, the oxygen concentrator that appeared in the corner of the living room in January and became as ordinary as the wood stove by February. She didn't make a fuss about it. Gran never made a fuss. She just started doing things more deliberately, writing down recipes she'd carried in her head for 40 years, arranging for the property taxes to be paid well in advance, dropping off her good china at her sister's place in Truro in person, rather than leaving it to the sorting out that comes after. I moved back to the farmhouse 18 months ago. I drove up from Halifax on a gray November morning with my laptop, 2 boxes, and the clear understanding that this was where I needed to be. I took my old bedroom back, the one with the east-facing window that got the early light, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar, and the lavender sachets Gran tucked into every drawer. I drove her to appointments at the Aberdeen Hospital in New Glasgow. I managed the prescriptions at the Lawtons in town, learned to operate the oxygen equipment, slept lighter than I ever had in my life, so I could hear her if she needed something in the night. The local home care team came in 3 mornings a week, and on the other 4 I handled it alone, and I want to be honest. It was hard in the way that only caring for someone you love can be hard, which is to say that it was also the most important thing I have ever done. In those last few months, Gran began talking to me differently. More carefully, like someone making sure everything was in order before a long trip. One evening in February, she was sitting in her chair beside the wood stove, hands around a mug of tea, watching the dark outside the window. I was at the kitchen table paying bills on my laptop. "Laurel," she said, in the deliberate voice she used for things that mattered. I looked up. "I've been in to see the lawyer. Doug on Water Street. Everything's sorted the way I want it sorted." She set the mug down on the side table. "When I'm gone, there'll be people who assume they know what belongs to them. I don't want you caught off guard. There's a brown envelope in the cedar chest, under the good quilts. You'll know what to do with it." I asked her what she meant. She looked at me in that level way she had, the way that meant she had thought this through carefully. And there was nothing left to worry about, and said, "I mean exactly what I said. Don't let anyone rush you out of this house. Not even your mother. Especially not your mother." She passed on a Thursday morning at the end of April. The kitchen windows were open because the weather had finally turned, and the smell of the Northumberland Strait was coming in on the breeze, and the birds were going in the apple trees out back, and she went quietly, with my hand in hers, and the morning light on her face. I had barely had time to sit with the fact of it before my phone buzzed on the nightstand. My mother. Calling for the first time since New Year's Eve, when she had texted a brief message and a single fireworks emoji. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask how it had happened, or whether Gran had been peaceful or whether I needed anything. She said, "We'll drive up on the weekend. There's a lot to sort out with the property." They arrived 2 days after the funeral. My mother, my half-brother, and my stepbrother, who had visited Gran exactly once, in the 18 months I had been living here. Once. A Sunday afternoon in August when he happened to be driving through the province. He had stayed for 2 hours, eaten most of the oatcakes Gran had made for the occasion, and left to catch a flight from Halifax. I had not seen him since. They pulled up the gravel drive in a rented SUV with Ontario plates, and my stepbrother climbed out first and walked directly to the barn without saying hello to me, walking the perimeter of it with his phone raised, taking photos. My half-brother came up to the porch, glanced at me, glanced past me into the house, and said, "Place looks good. Better than I remembered. We could probably list it before the end of June if we move on it." I didn't say anything. My mother came inside with her coat still on, stood in the middle of Gran's kitchen, and looked around the room slowly, the way you look at a space you're assessing. She touched the edge of the old pine table. Gran's pine table, 4 generations old, scratched and solid, the table where I had done my homework every night for 10 years. Ran one hand along the surface and said, "This would do well at auction. There's a market for this kind of piece." I stood in the doorway of that kitchen and watched my mother price the furniture, and I felt something go very still inside me. Not grief, not anger, something colder and clearer. By evening, they had walked every room. My stepbrother had taken measurements in the barn and spent dinner quoting comparable land prices in Pictou County on his phone. My half-brother had researched rural property sales in the area and announced that 12 acres with a house and outbuildings in this condition could fetch somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000. Split appropriately between the beneficiaries of the estate, he said. My mother, grandson in Vancouver, the agricultural society Gran had specified. It would work out reasonably for everyone. "You'll want to find a place in town to rent while we're managing the listing," my mother told me across the dinner table, in the tone she used for practical matters. Not unkindly. Just plainly, the way you inform someone of an inconvenience. It complicates things if you're living here. I put my fork down. I thought about 18 months of appointments at the Aberdeen. I thought about the nights Gran was frightened, and I sat beside her until whatever had frightened her passed. I thought about the oxygen concentrator and the prescriptions and the particular exhaustion of watching someone you love leave, slowly, day by day, and the way you keep getting up every morning and doing it anyway, because she would have done it for you without a second thought. I thought about my half-brother's Christmas card with the Visa gift card inside, addressed in his wife's handwriting. I thought about my stepbrother's text message, "Let me know if there's anything I can do." I had let him know twice. He'd been busy. "I'll be back in a minute," I said. My mother started to say something. I was already in the hallway. Gran's bedroom was at the end of the hall past the photographs. Me at 9 in rubber boots standing in the garden, holding up an enormous zucchini like I'd won something. Me at 16 in a borrowed graduation gown, squinting into the sun. Gran and my late grandfather at a kitchen table in some other decade, laughing together at something outside the frame. I stopped at that one for a moment. Then I went into her room. The cedar chest had been at the foot of her bed my entire childhood. I had sat on it to put on my shoes every morning for years. I had draped wet towels over it and been told, patiently, not to. I knew the way the brass latch felt and the particular creak of the hinges and the smell of cedar and old quilts that came out when you lifted the lid. I lifted it now and set aside the folded quilts on top, and there, exactly where Gran had said it would be, was a brown envelope, thick and sealed, with my name on the front in her careful handwriting. I carried it back to the kitchen. My mother, my half-brother, and my stepbrother were all watching me when I came through the door. My stepbrother had put his phone face down on the table. "What is that?" my mother asked. I sat down at the pine table and broke the seal. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a registered land transfer, notarized, filed, stamped with the Nova Scotia Land Registry seal. I recognized the format, the property. The house, the barn, all 12 acres, transferred out of Gran's name and into mine, dated the previous August, 8 months before she died, 8 months before I had even moved back to the farmhouse. The second document was a letter. My hands were steadier than I expected as I unfolded it. I read it aloud. I didn't plan to. It just came out that way, Gran's voice in my head, and it seemed right that they should hear it in her words. Laurel, if you are reading this, then I am gone. And knowing you, you are probably running on no sleep and not enough food, and taking care of everyone else's feelings before your own. Please stop that and make yourself something to eat before you do anything else. I want to explain the August paperwork, because you deserve to understand, and because your mother will say it wasn't fair. Fairness and justice are not the same thing. I have thought about this carefully for a long time. Property that goes through an estate can be contested. It can be delayed and argued over and held up in legal proceedings, while the people who should never have had a claim to it tie everything in knots. I knew your mother would find a way to argue. She is very good at finding reasons. So I sat down with Doug in August, when I was thinking clearly and when no one was living in this house but me, and I did what should have been done years ago. Doug will confirm all of this. He has a sealed letter from me as well, in the event anyone wishes to pursue the matter legally. I do not recommend it. You came back. You are the one who drove me to appointments and figured out the equipment and slept lightly and did not complain, not once, not even when I was frightened and difficult, and not the version of myself I would have chosen to be. You were here. When no one else was here, you were here, and that has been the greatest comfort of the last years of my life. The house is yours. The land is yours. I have been proud of you since the first morning you showed up at my door at 8 years old with 2 plastic bags of clothes and more courage than you knew you had, and I have been proud of you every day since. Stay. Grow things. Leave the lilacs alone. They know what they're doing. All my love, forever, Gran. I folded the letter. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the wood stove settle. My mother's face had closed into something hard and controlled, the expression I remembered from childhood, the one that meant she was working out her next move. My half-brother was staring at the land transfer document with the concentrated attention of someone looking for a mistake. My stepbrother was sitting very still. She was sick, my mother said finally. Her voice had a slight crack in it at the edge. She wasn't thinking clearly. You were here, you had influence over her, and... She transferred the property in August, I said. I was living in Halifax. I moved back in November. There are 3 months between the 2 dates, and Doug has documentation of her condition and cognitive state at the time of signing. There are 2 independent witnesses. We can contest it, my half-brother said. Undue influence doesn't require. You can call Doug on Monday, I said. He'll walk you through it. His number is in the Nova Scotia Law Society directory. My half-brother stopped talking. My stepbrother was looking at his phone again, and whatever he was reading, it had made him very quiet. My mother tried one more approach. Her voice softened. She said she understood things had been hard. She said she knew she hadn't always been there the way she should have been. She said surely Gran would have wanted the family. She said the word family, to be taken care of, and that surely some arrangement could be made that was fair to everyone. I thought about the 18 months. I thought about the oxygen concentrator humming in the corner of the living room. I thought about the winter mornings when I had to clear the drive before Gran's home care worker arrived, and the way Gran had always left a mug of tea waiting for me when I came back inside. I thought about holding her hand on a Thursday morning in April while the birds went in the apple trees. I thought about my mother's New Year's text with the fireworks emoji. I'm going to ask you to leave now, I said. I kept my voice quiet, even, not out of anger, but this is my home and I would like to be alone in it tonight. My stepbrother stood first. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair without a word, walked past me, and I heard the porch door open and close and then his footsteps crunching across the gravel to the rented SUV. My half-brother sat for another moment. He looked at me the way people look at something they're trying to decide how to feel about, and then he said quietly, "She always did like you best." "She liked whoever showed up," I said. He stood and collected his coat and walked out without another word. My mother lingered. She stood in Gran's kitchen with her coat still on and looked at the pine table and at the photographs in the hallway and at me, and her face did something complicated that I didn't have a name for, not quite regret, not quite grief, something adjacent to both. She opened her mouth, and I thought she was going to say something that might have mattered, and then she closed it again, because there was nothing left that would have mattered enough. She turned and walked out. I heard the front door, and then the crunch of gravel, and then the engine of the rented SUV, and then the sound fading down the county road until it was gone, and there was nothing left but the wind off the straight and the birds settling in for the evening, and the old house creaking gently around me the way it always had. I sat down in Gran's chair. I put her letter on the table in front of me, and I looked at her handwriting, careful and cramped, the hands that had bothered her in those last months, and I let myself cry in a way I hadn't let myself cry since Thursday morning, since the birds in the apple trees and the smell of the sea coming through the window. Not because I was sad. I was sad, yes, but this was something else underneath that. This was the feeling of something long unsettled, finally settling, of a door closing on something that had been left open for 24 years, drafty and cold, and the warmth that rushes in when it finally shuts. Gran had seen me. All those years, from the 8-year-old with the plastic bags of clothes to the 32-year-old who drove up in November and stayed, she had seen exactly who I was and exactly what I was worth. And she had made for sure, in her careful and deliberate way, that no one could ever stand in Gran's kitchen and tell me to pack my things. I sat in her chair until the light went orange and then purple and then dark, and then I got up and put the kettle on, and I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the 12 acres. My 12 acres, and thought about the lilacs. Gran was right. They were coming in early this year, heavy and purple along the fence line, and the smell of them was coming in through the screen door, and the house was quiet and full of her, and it was mine. The following Monday, I called Doug Arsenault's office, and he confirmed everything clearly and without hesitation. The transfer was clean, uncontestable under any reasonable legal standard, completed at a time when Gran was wholly herself and making decisions that were entirely her own. He said she had been very organized about it. He said that was characteristic of her. I thanked him and hung up and sat for a moment at the pine table before I went outside to check on the garden, because that was a real thing that needed doing. And Gran had always said the best thing for a heavy heart was work that shows results. My mother called twice that week. I let both calls go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. My half-brother sent a text 3 days later. I'm sorry for how I behaved. I wasn't handling things well. I read it twice and set my phone down on the table and went out to start turning the compost because the compost needed turning, and that was something I could actually do. The porch boards on the south side had needed replacing for 2 winters. I replaced them myself over a long weekend in May with wood from the Rona in New Glasgow and the set of instructions Gran had left in her binder of household notes, which she had organized by category and updated as recently as 6 months ago, because of course she had. The gutters needed clearing, and I got someone in to do that. The barn roof needed a patch, and I was working up to it. There was a lot that needed doing. There was always a lot that needed doing on 12 acres of Nova Scotia farmland, and I had the time to do it. And the house was mine, and the land was mine. And every morning when the east window lit up the bedroom Gran had given me when I was 8 years old, I understood again, quietly and completely, that the greatest inheritance she left me was not the property. It was the 24 years of her deciding, every single day, that I was worth staying for. She had done it the way she did everything, without asking to be thanked, without making it a bigger thing than it needed to be, without ever once making me feel like something she had inherited instead of chosen. And when the moment came and I needed something solid to stand on, she had made sure it was there. The same way she had always made sure, steadily, carefully, without any fuss at all. If this story stayed with you, I'd love for you to subscribe to Pure Revenge Tales. There are so many more stories like this one, about ordinary people who held on quietly, and the moments that finally gave them something solid to hold on to.